Hi everyone! So the Nothing Phone 4a costs around 40,000 rupees while the Nothing Phone 4b is available for 35,000 rupees. So the real question here is, should you save 5,000 rupees and get the phone 4b or spend a little more for the phone 4a? I have been testing both of these phones side by side for over a week, and by the end of this video, you will know exactly which one is a better choice for you, so make sure to stick till the end. But before I start talking about the differences, let me mention the similarities, and the biggest similarity is the software experience, which feels almost identical on both of these phones. Yes, the Nothing Phone 4a has a slightly more powerful Snapdragon 7 series chipset, while the phone 4b uses the Snapdragon 6 series chip, but in regular day-to-day use, I honestly did not notice a huge difference. And this is something I really like about Nothing phones. Even with a relatively modest chipset, the software and hardware optimization is so good that the phone still feels fast and smooth. Now, to be very honest, I was expecting the phone 4b to feel a little sluggish. I had just finished reviewing the Galaxy A27, which uses the Snapdragon 6 Gen 3, and I thought the 4b, which comes with the newer Snapdragon 6 Gen 4, will feel slow too, but let me tell you, the phone 4b feels noticeably faster and smoother than the Galaxy A27. That is honestly crazy, and it just shows how well optimized the Nothing OS is. Anyway, comparing the phone 4b to the phone 4a, the 4a is still slightly better in a few areas. The haptics are stronger, so typing feels more satisfying, and during heavier multitasking, like being on a video call while browsing the gallery, the phone 4a feels a little faster and more responsive. But again, the difference is not massive. The gaming performance is also fairly similar on both of these phones. Neither of them is a great gaming phone, and the overall performance on both is pretty average. And again, don't be mistaken, it is not like the phone 4a suddenly gives you significantly higher FPS than the phone 4b. The display experience on both of these phones is also quite similar. Both phones have great displays, the touch response is really good, and the brightness is more than usable for everyday use. So whether you're scrolling through social media, watching videos, or simply using the phone outdoors, both of these displays feel perfectly fine. That said, the phone 4a does have a few advantages. First is that it gets noticeably brighter outdoors because of its higher HBM brightness. Second, it has a slightly higher pixel density, so the display looks a little sharper. And third, you get Gorilla Glass 7 eye protection, whereas the phone 4b uses Dragon Trail glass. The more noticeable difference actually comes in the speaker department. The speaker quality on the phone 4b is not very impressive. The phone 4a is not extraordinary either, but it sounds slightly better, especially in terms of clarity and sound stage. So the 4a sounds clearer while watching movies or videos. But then one thing that disappointed me on both of these phones, however, is the lack of HDR10 playback support on Netflix and other OTT platforms. By the way, you will also notice that the phone 4b has slightly thicker bezels and chunkier chin compared to the phone 4a. Okay, so what about the design then? Well, clearly the Nothing Phone 4a is flashier and has a more attractive looking design. There is simply a lot more going on with this design, while the phone 4b for me looks cleaner, simpler, and more minimal. Some people may actually prefer the more understated look of the phone 4b, but side by side, the 4a definitely has more personality. Both of these phones use plastic frames, so neither of them give a truly premium flagship-like feel. Still, the phone 4a feels slightly better built and more robust in the hand. The phone 4b, on the other hand, feels a little more plasticky, especially because of its back panel. As for durability, both phones come with only a basic IP64 dust and water resistance, so they should be fine against small splashes. And yes, both of these phones have Nothing's LED lighting system on the back. I have genuinely found it useful at times, especially for notifications and a few other customizable functions. Likewise, one of the biggest differences between these two phones is the battery life. The phone 4b packs a massive 6,000 mAh battery, while the phone 4a comes with a 5,400 mAh unit. With the phone 4a, I was getting around 6 to 7 hours of screen on time, with 7 hours being the maximum in most cases. The phone 4b, on the other hand, consistently gave me around 7 to 8 hours of screen on time. I also ran a video loop test on both of these phones, and the phone 4a drained roughly 5% more battery than the phone 4b. But then there is one trade-off with the phone 4b, as it only supports 33-watt charging compared to 50-watt on the phone 4a. And because of the larger battery and slower charging speed, the phone 4b takes noticeably longer to charge from 0 to 100%. Okay, lastly, we have what is probably the biggest difference between these two phones, their cameras. The Phone 4a comes with an additional 50 megapixel 3.5x optical zoom camera, whereas the Phone 4b only has a main and an ultra-wide camera. And it is not just the missing telephoto lens, the main camera hardware has also been significantly downgraded on the Phone 4b. The 4a uses a larger primary sensor with a wider 24mm focal length, whereas the Phone 4b has a much smaller sensor with a tighter 28mm focal length. The selfie camera is also downgraded from the higher resolution 32 megapixel camera on the 4a to a 16 megapixel camera on the Phone 4b. So on paper, the Phone 4a is clearly ahead, but what about the actual photos? Surprisingly, during daytime, both these phones capture some really good photos from their main cameras. The Phone 4a has slightly better dynamic range, and because of its wider focal length, it captures more of the scene, but the Phone 4b is not bad by any means. Its photos still have good colors, decent detail, and respectable dynamic range. The same applies to the ultra-wide camera as well. The Phone 4b does not offer as wide a field of view as the Phone 4a, but overall the image quality is still quite usable. The bigger difference, however, starts appearing in low light. This is where the larger sensor on the Phone 4a produces cleaner images with better clarity and more detail. The Phone 4b struggles a lot more once the lighting becomes challenging. But then again, during daytime, both phones do a surprisingly good job. Even the 2x portraits from the Phone 4b are better than I expected. The skin tones are handled well, the dynamic range is good, and the background separation looks quite natural. Just look at some of these portrait samples, and even the selfies are not bad at all. However, the Phone 4a is still one of the best mid-range camera phones for portraits right now. The dedicated 3.5x telephoto camera captures some impressive portraits. And when it comes to zoom photos, there is simply no comparison. The optical zoom camera on the Phone 4a is significantly better than the digital crop you get from the Phone 4b. For videography, both of these phones can record up to 4K from the main camera, and the footage is decent enough. The Phone 4a has slightly better stabilization, but the Phone 4b is still perfectly usable. From the ultrawide and the selfie cameras, however, both are limited to 1080p recording, so there is nothing particularly exciting here. So yeah, both the Nothing Phone 4a and the Phone 4b are among the better mid-range phones of 2026. Of course, without the ongoing RAM and storage price crisis, I think these phones would have been much more aggressively priced. The Phone 4a could have launched at around 30,000 rupees, while the Phone 4b could have been somewhere between 22 to 25,000 rupees. At those prices, both would have been absolute killers. But at 35,000 rupees and 40,000 rupees, the value proposition becomes slightly more complicated. The biggest reason to consider either of these phones, of course, is their software experience. Nothing OS feels exceptionally well optimized. It feels clean, smooth, and thoughtfully designed. All the small details like the widgets, the essential space features, the animations, and the overall UI feel properly integrated. And that very optimization is exactly why even the less powerful Phone 4b feels so smooth in everyday use. Still, if you can stretch your budget by 5,000 rupees, I would definitely recommend getting the Phone 4a. You get a more attractive design, a slightly better display, stronger haptics, and slightly better performance, and most importantly, a significantly better camera system. Especially if you enjoy taking portraits, this dedicated telephoto camera alone makes that extra 5,000 rupees worth paying for. For me, choosing the Phone 4a over the Phone 4b at this price difference is almost a no-brainer. The Phone 4b at 35,000 rupees is a little difficult for me to recommend purely based on the specifications, but if your priority is clean, stable, and smooth software, it is still a good phone. That said, before purchasing this phone, I would also check for discounts on older premium mid-range phones. For example, the Galaxy A56 is currently available for around 35,000 rupees, and to be completely honest, at the same price, I would probably choose the Galaxy A56 over the Phone 4b. Alright everyone, that was all for my toe-to-toe comparison between the Nothing Phone 4a and the Nothing Phone 4b. Which one would you go for? Please let me know in the comments below. And while you're there, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Saying this, I'm Pratima, and thank you so much for watching.